committed.
When I was a kid, and one of the things that I really keyed into was adults at the time would repeat things over and over again. For instance, Newsweek magazine, my dad used to get it all the time. And we'd be sitting around the dinner table, and he'd say, well, you know, and then he'd say word for word a sentence that was read from the Newsweek magazine. So it was like the magazine programmed him to say that thing. This wasn't an original thought that he had. And that's really where it started, I guess. You know, in my, like, early childhood, the concept that the people that I was dealing with were, I used the term chemical robots at the time, but the concept that they weren't actually conscious. They had these repeated behaviors that they would do over and over again.
In his paper, Nick Bostrom defined a simulation of the entire mental history of mankind as an ancestor simulation when estimating the amount of computing power one might need.
Does the idea of ancestor simulations suggest that we're retracing the steps of the genuine society that created the simulation?
Well, that's one possibility. There could also be all kinds of variations, ranging from complete fantasy worlds that bear no resemblance to anything that existed in physical reality to variations of history. All of that is conceptually possible. But an ancestor simulation that I talk about in the paper, which is to consider the type of simulation where the simulators would be creating very detailed simulations of people like their historical predecessors. Maybe not exactly the same people, but the same kind of people.
Back when I was 9 or 10, I used to joke about with my brothers and sister that people would just go home and just like sit down and stare at walls when no one was watching. You know, they would just like, you know, go home and T-pose effectively in their private spaces when they weren't seen because they would just deactivate their programming, I guess. I used to joke about that, but that idea ran with me a lot when I was older. And it kind of became a little horrifying that these people I'd be talking to, since nobody was watching, the program would stop working.
Does not assume that all the details of our world would be simulated to perfect subatomic precision all the time. And indeed, that kind of simulation might well be completely intractable. Obviously, it depends on the kind of compute power available in the basement simulator. If they have infinitely fast computers, sure. But no, the idea rather is that you would be able to create a simulation capturing only enough that to the simulated creatures they couldn't tell the difference. And that would involve some pretty clever footwork on behalf of the simulators, that they would be able, for example, to fill in more detail in a particular part of reality when we are paying attention, but then not simulating all of those details all the time.
I'm occupying maybe 20 square feet, and yet there's a whole world that exists because I know about it, just here in my brain.
I worked with a company for a little while that launched what is now a very popular app that is an interactive fiction app. You know, there's an element of, well, it's just like writing a choose your own adventure, but what it became swiftly obvious to me how simple some of our own decision making is from a coding perspective.
A popular recent Reddit AMA was with a user who wrote, "I am a real-life non-player character."
All right, we're all good. So, a NPC is a non-player character that you will normally see in a video game. They're usually the people that aren't controlled by the player of the video game. They are the characters that were kind of programmed in there. It's kind of like talking to a person in real life, but they only have a set amount of things that they can say.
Hey, buddy, got a dead cat in there or what?
And you only have a specific lines that you can say back to it in response.
I can only imagine if I was really a gamer how I would experience social interaction. But even as a non-game player, I sometimes find myself, dealing with non-player characters.
I work at a grocery store, and I have a specific list of things that I need to accomplish when greeting a customer and checking out their items. And because of that, it just made logical sense that I create kind of a mental script that I go through with each customer.
When this stimuli happens to him, generally speaking, he reacts in this way. It's not terribly different from the code that tells the chickens of Minecraft what to do, or the turtles in Mario Brothers, or the mosquitoes of Maine. They're all kind of operating on the same principles. If this, then that. If not, then don't. It's not too much of a leap to think that consciousness may mean we are being inhabited by some sort of player type intelligence.
The reason everyone loves to be like, oh, small world, is because it is actually, there just isn't enough processing power to render 7 billion consciousnesses. There are not 7 billion consciousnesses. Yeah, there might be 7 billion in the general algorithm of how many people are on Earth, but when you start talking to people, there's probably like a couple 100,000 AIs that are serving as the substrate for the, people experience that everyone's having on Earth. So when you find that the same people are 6 degrees of separation, it's not a surprise at all. In fact, it's a flaw in the system. And that's just a limit of the actual processing power of the machine that the sim's running on.
Well, have you ever encountered a non-player character?
I mean, you encounter them all the time when you're walking down the street and you don't interact with people. It's just like in a video game. There's much less processing power being attributed to the automatons. But once you start interacting, then something has to actually serve as the intelligence behind that so-called, human.
Society is rapidly secularizing. Religion is completely.
I know a way to do this. Listen to the way that man spoke that. That doesn't make it true. I'm not saying this is true. That's why I presented. Yet, notice how he did not over-explain his perspective. I'm not saying that's true, and it certainly does not solve a problem, but the way the way we usually detect truth is the tone and how he did not over-explain the perspective whatsoever.
Of original perfection. And the story, which is a peculiarly Christian one, is the story of the fall of Adam and the promise of a recovery of Adam's original divinity. Science is the ultimate authority in our culture, and scientists cultivate the image that they stand between mortals and God, and that they are the new clergy, so to speak.
The notion that science and religion were enemies is really a historical myth. In fact, for most of our history, science and religion have been intimately entwined. The first time you have a really major separation between science and religion is when Darwin put forward his thesis that man was descended from apes and not made in the image of God. That caused a huge tension between science and religion. And in the late 19th century, a mythology was in fact created that science and religion had always been at war, which in fact is a historical myth.
So why not get it all out on the table? Okay, you want to pursue genetic engineering because human beings, as the image likeness of the God, have the right to create new species, transgenic species, participate in creation, a new creation, a second Genesis. That's our birthright. That's what was promised to Adam. Okay, if that's true, if that's what we're about, let's say that's what we're doing. Okay, and stop all this talk about we're doing this for medical reasons. Okay.
The Industrial Revolution took place in the Christian West. So it's not surprising that most religious theories trying to deal with these changes are rooted in the Christian tradition. But now that the whole world is confronted with modern technology, people within other traditions also seek answers to the implications of modernity and how to reconcile technology with their own beliefs. Their reflections might give us an idea about how the world would react to the prospect of a transhuman future.
To me, the data, the code, the communications, forever, amen. Turing, von Neumann, Ada Lovelace, Babbage, around me shines the bits, and in me is the bite.
T-pose, eh?
Rafael, Gabriel, Uriel, Mikael. For we, the data, the code, the communications, forever, amen. Arthur C. Clarke once said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But I think that's actually the wrong way around. I think that we're trying to achieve magic through technology. Magic is in many ways the idea that we can control the world around us. And of course, this is what technology is about. But what people usually call magic is more close to the pre-rational idea that everything is connected with me. That is the view of a small child. But as we grow up,
this has some relevance. You don't have to watch. But now we know where time began, as if we didn't before. Of course,
extra wide rear gate.
Pardon me.
Subaru Forester.
These people spin on balls, so of course they got to advertise.
With tomorrow at 9 on National Geographic.
Components of a one. When ancient man looked out at the night sky, is this essentially what he saw? Is it possible that just a few thousand years ago, the sky was filled with forms that towered over ancient man?
Yes, the tree of life, giant silicon trees, yes.
The myths begin with the timeless epoch before the fall, before timekeeping references, before seasons, before the cycle of day and night.
It is the golden age, the age of the great planetary conjunction.
Obviously, wandering stars within the firmament. Have to ignore all the CGI solar system references.
The universal monarch, the firmly seated God, the motionless sun.
Pardon the drama.
A God remembered as the great sphere of heaven, when the heaven was close to the earth. The universal monarch possessed a luminous eye, heart, and soul, the mother goddess, Venus, daughter and spouse of the universal monarch. Within the womb of the goddess resided the unborn hero, Mars, heart of the heart, pupil of the eye. The goddess was the great star, radiating its comet-like hair in all directions, the celestial prototype of the beautiful princess. She was the glory of heaven, the animating flame giving life to the ancient sun god. Her place was squarely in the center of the sun. This produced the great wheel of the sun, with the goddess as the nave and the hero as the axle.
Axle, eh? Axle Rose.
As the configuration evolved, the comet-like streams gathered into 3 rays, remembered as the triform or threefold goddess. Later, this same comet-like material presented 4 streamers or rays, giving the wheel its 4 spokes, 4 luminous winds, 4 life-bearing streams, 4 flaming arrows launched into the 4 directions, and the 4 pillars of heaven.
Yeah, the drama's obvious. To present the truth, but not let
Day and night
the ego ignore it.
the coming of a great crescent on Saturn. This crescent enclosing the central star of Venus. Saturn's crescent horns provided the celestial timepiece for the daily cycle, fading against a brightening sky as they rose to the right. Growing brilliant as they descended to the left. The hero was born from the womb of the mother goddess, and wore the goddess as a conical crown. He grew a beard. His tongue protruded. He took the form of a dagger or peg, plunged into the below. The hero consorted with the goddess, re-entering the goddess womb as the impregnating seed, then emerging again in a new incarnation, as both the goddess and the hero broke away from their original axial positions. The reborn Mars wore a spiraling sidelock, which was the goddess herself, now taking on her serpentine aspect. Hero and goddess engaged in a spiraling dance about the cosmic center. The serpent tail wrapped itself around Venus to produce a band presenting the form of a great eye, so that in its re-entry, Mars became the pupil, or the red apple of the eye. Saturn's golden age was interrupted by catastrophe, when the enclosure of the gods was sealed shut. The descent of the hero in his dark aspect brought overwhelming clouds and darkness. This was the underworld journey, the archetypal ordeal of the hero, and for the earth, a deluge of fire and water. Then Mars rose out of the waters of the deep to produce the world mountain.
Mount Meru, I imagine? I have no idea.
Formed the rim of the great world wheel, the fiery body of the encircling serpent. Watered by the four rivers, this was the land of the gods, resting on the summit of the world mountain, a bright crescent forming the horned peak. The mountain of Mars became the mooring post of the turning sky. The column of wind or water rising along the world axis. The cosmos, with its four extensions holding aloft the world wheel. But the ancient paradise did not last. The hero spirited away the goddess, or stole the heart of the universal monarch, who tumbled from the summit of heaven. The Golden Age gave way to the cosmic night, when the hordes of chaos were set loose and the doomsday dragon moved about in the sky, a monster created by the twisting forms of Venus and Mars. It was then that the terrible goddess appeared with wildly disheveled hair, lamenting the death of the universal monarch. In the events that follow, the hero will subdue the dragon or pacify the raging goddess. The universal monarch's own son, Jupiter, will be installed in the center of the sky. But the universal monarch has departed, and with his death comes the end of the Golden Age.
All that remain are fragments of a collective memory, and hidden deep in the human psyche, a sense of something irrevocably lost.
Whatever. But this is why apparently we've not considered time for very long. So there's no reason why it shouldn't end immediately. But does this solve this problem?
Welcome to the Disney
Here we go.
Bundle, where
Great.
Disney Plus,
Sorry.
Hulu, and ESPN Plus
Even this has to have
on all your
really
Hulu
an issue this serious, and you have advertisement.
Or a drug once, but you can sell a person up to 40 times a day. I know one of the women I interviewed, Vicky, thought she was going to a job in a bathing suit factory in Italy, when instead she was sold to a casino in Cyprus, where she was forced to service 40 men a day. When she was finally rescued, she needed extensive vaginal and anal reconstruction.
It's May 2013.
$90 is the average price of a slave today worldwide.
Have things
and that
changed?
actually represents a collapse in the world market for slavery in terms of price. Back when slavery was legal in this country, say, for example, in the 1840s, the average slave cost about $5,000. And in fact, today, slaves are so cheap and so easy to come by that they're certainly not valued as people. They're barely valued as commodities. They have become, as abolitionist and author Kevin Bales calls them, disposable people. $67,000 is the average profits that one sex slave in the United States makes for her trafficker. That's one girl in one brothel, and most traffickers have many more than just one. There are somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 American children sold into slavery each year in the United States. In fact, if you were to go down to International Boulevard in Oakland, California, any night of the week, you'll see at least 100 children for sale with their pimps just behind them in the shadows. The average age of entry into forced prostitution is 13. And as one of the traffickers said, I prefer the young ones, quote, I prefer the young ones, because it only takes about a week of sodomy and gang rape, their eyes go blank, and you know they're not going to try to run away. Greed and lust fuel the modern day slave trade. The demand for free or cheap labor, the demand for illicit sex or sex with children. To the traffickers, these aren't people. They're commodities to be bought and sold, to be used up, to be disposed of. But each slave has a name, each slave has a story, and each one has a life to try to reconstruct. Like Mikhail, who was forced to work for 12 hours a day for no pay in a large construction project. His owners beat him and occasionally raped him at night. Or Masha, who at age 14 wishes that her traffickers had killed her because she can no longer stand the nightmares and she lacks the courage for suicide. Or 21-year-old Antonio, who came to the United States from Mexico on the promise of a good-paying job. He watched while he was sold for $500 to a Florida tomato farmer. Or the Chico State co-ed, whose life was ruined when she went to a party when her boyfriend took her to a party and plied her with alcohol until she passed out. He then filmed her while two of his friends raped her. The next day he showed her the film and he told her he would send her parents a copy and post it on Facebook if she didn't let him pimp her out. She was for sale on Craigslist for nearly 6 months. Now, the people I interview, they were powerless to confront their oppressors. But you, in this room, you are not powerless. And in fact, you are some of the best advocates, excuse me.
So Jesus, if I said, was it Marsha or Marsha? I'm still disrespectful. She would rather been killed after what she was put through by her pimps than endure the continuation here, trapped in her body, and for she lacks the courage to kill herself. They say Jesus would have came for just one. Why can't we, the living souls, do anything? I'm just saying, what is the delay, guys? I'm sorry if I'm part of the hindrance. Let's all work together.